the federal government's fall economic statement was released recently, and there was a little bit of a tune-up, some improvements to the national carbon tax. So I'm going to talk to economist Michael Bernstein from Clean Prosperity about that. Welcome to the interview, Michael.
Thanks, Markham.
Well, like, I have a question that I know I think I know what the economist is going to say, but it's a curious thing to me. Now, apparently there is now an investment tax credit for carbon capture and storage. Why do we need one of those when most of the large emitters who would implement CCS are only paying 10, maybe 20% of the actual carbon price? They get a discount under the output-based pricing system.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the reality is that if those emitters had confidence that they were going to have to pay that future carbon price, then they would likely have sufficient incentive to invest in that carbon capture and storage technology today. But the problem is that a future carbon price is not bankable because there's political uncertainty. A new government could come along and completely change the schedule or cancel the price altogether. So that's the primary reason. There are other arguments that are made, like the need to attract investment capital that might otherwise flow to, for example, the United States, where there is a very generous production tax credit given on carbon capture. But I think the key piece is that we should be thinking about, or really the government and those who care about climate action should be thinking about how we create more, a stronger guarantee that that future price will come to pass.
Well, if that's the rationale for the investment tax credit, couldn't a new federal government cancel the tax credit as well, just as easily as make changes to the carbon tax?
They could. They certainly could. And so the reason why that policy tends to be more bankable, so to speak, is that those making those investments, and typically the way the policy is implemented is it's given in the near term. So typically within 12 months of investment. So you have less uncertainty when the money is coming so much sooner. But it is true that with any policy, there is some policy uncertainty.
Fair enough. Now, there were other improvements made to the carbon tax, Michael. Can you describe a couple of them for us?
Yeah, they were really important, I think, and little noticed among the big headlines of the fall economic statement overall. But there are a couple of pieces that we were particularly keen to see as Clean Prosperity because we think they make the policy fairer and thus more sustainable. And there are really two key ones there. The first one was the federal government announced that they will be providing additional compensation to farmers to help offset some of the costs that they don't really have a way right now to avoid very easily. There are certain processes on farms, heating barns, for example, which is sometimes difficult to do with electricity. Grain drying actually would be probably an even better example where there also are some alternative technologies, but they're very nascent today. So that would be the first, is some additional compensation to farmers. The second piece, which I think is also really important, is providing more compensation for small businesses. The federal government earmarked, I believe it was $200 million to do that. They didn't say exactly how they'll implement that today, but we as Clean Prosperity have been advocating for them to provide some sort of tax credit, kind of the equivalent of a reduction in the small business tax rate, because the reality is that small businesses only receive today about 7% of the proceeds from carbon taxes, even though they pay 20% or more of the actual cost. So I was happy to see the government recognize that and try to take some sort of compensating measure.
Do we have any evidence to date, Michael, that the carbon tax is beginning to actually generate the kind of GHG reductions that it's supposed to?
Well, the best data we have on that still remains the British Columbia case, where we do have many studies that show really unequivocally that the carbon price does work to reduce emissions. But your point probably is more, you're probably, I assume, more asking about the federal policy. And there, I would hope that we will soon have that data. We do not yet, because the policy came into place in 2019. And actually, the most recent greenhouse gas data we have from the federal government is from 2019. So once we get that 2020 data, it may become a little bit easier. Of course, though, I will just caveat that with the obvious that COVID really did create a change in the trend lines of all emissions. So it's probably going to take some sophisticated work to really tease out the impacts of specific policies.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for your insights. Always appreciated.
Thanks a lot, Markham.